Recording.
Okay, thank you.
All right, welcome everyone. This is our last webinar for this fiscal year. How time flies. And for our last webinar, we decided to go with a topic which is, I think, close to everybody's heart, is authority having jurisdiction. But before I go into the presentation or the webinar, first of all, I want to reach out and thank Claude for all his organizing and prep for the webinars and all the administration. He's really the brains behind these webinars. So without him, I don't think they'd be working as smoothly. So Claude, thank you very much for that. Second, the FNNBOA board for their giving us their insights and how to move on these webinars. That's great. Appreciate that. Finally, want to reach out to ISC. They're our funding partners, and they give us all the funds to hold these webinars. So I'd like to thank them. So the plans are, I'm hoping to speak for about 40 minutes or so, and then I'm going to turn it over to Rasika, who is a senior planner for housing projects and community planning at Towessawan, and she'll talk about how they've managed with their authority having jurisdiction. So that's sort of the lay of the land for the next hour. I anticipate we probably will go over, which is fine if we have to. At least I have the time. And depending on the discussion, I probably believe we're probably would do a second or third part of this, and we'll identify those through the topics. All right, how do I now, I'm sharing. So how do I, well, there you go. So basically, I'm going to focus on what does authority have in jurisdiction, how this is applied off reserve in the municipalities, how this is applied or not applied on reserve, type of actions to be taken for authority having jurisdiction, the implications and discussions. And you can see I think this is really the elephant in the room discussion among many of us. And we've been on this topic since around about 2006, I think we first started to raise the whole issue of the importance of having authority jurisdiction, ensuring you have proper then bylaws, ensure you have the capacity for stop work orders. Again, better, how to and take control and enforceability within the communities. And I think the first piece we really wrote on this was a newsletter back in 2009 when we started to raise the issues. And so what does authority having jurisdiction? Well, in land development, the authority having jurisdiction is generally responsibility shared between governments. So off reserve, the local government has control over planning issues, but the provinces designate by legislation to the municipalities to carry out their authority. So for example, in Ontario, you have the Ontario Municipal Act, and this allows the provinces to enforce not only building code, but noise bylaws and parking bylaws. Again, it's all their authority having jurisdiction. Our focus is going to be on land development, but it's more than just land. It's noise bylaws, it's parking bylaws, it's green space bylaws. So basically, so it's the municipalities that do have the control on the authority having jurisdiction. I just got to move the screen here. Oh, there we go. This is blocking me out. 1 second. I'm getting blocked out here. There we go. So basically, local government controls local planning issues. The provinces gives them through legislation, and through them, the provinces set up the building code, and they help set up the standards. There's a bit of exception here, except for unorganized areas of the province. And what does that mean? Well, unorganized areas are any geographic regions in Canada that doesn't form part of a municipality or a First Nations community. So in these areas, it's generally like a county. It's a very rural areas. And in these areas, there's no enforcement of building codes. There's really no controls taking place. So it's a bit of a different discussion, but it's important to know that unorganized areas have very few building controls. It's generally left up to the contractors to make sure the building code and the property owner that the ban by or the building permits and building codes are being built properly. Okay, how do I move again? There we go. There we go. So in any organization, so if you take a municipality, it's generally an individual that carries out the standards or the enforcement. So we have, for example, the building code, the municipal building officer, it's the fire chief, it's the head of the health department, it's the electrical inspector. All these people have controls to carry out the authority having jurisdiction. What does that mean? They have the power to basically issue stop work orders. They have the power to ensure compliance under their specific codes. So the terms most common that's applicable with authority having jurisdiction is the building code, the fire codes, there's the farmer codes. So there's a number of codes under authority having jurisdiction within land management that takes a responsibility. So basically, during planning of a building, the authority having jurisdiction reviews the overall proposals for compliance, and they make sure that they meet the planning and zoning regulations. So how do they do this? Building permits. So building permits are the key ingredients for authority having jurisdiction. And how do they do that? Well, during the building, the municipality, they review to make sure their building codes, the zoning laws are being properly. They want to make sure that the homes are properly, that the plans are properly stamped. They want to make sure that the soil has been properly tested, because they are responsible to make sure that this home is being built, because they are the authority having jurisdiction, and it is their responsibility to make sure the home is being built. And we're talking about that, the consequences when that doesn't happen. So why building permits? Well, as we know, off reserve, right? You obtain approval. They want to validate the site construction, right? They want to make sure that the drawings and the documents are in place. They want to make sure that it complies with the laws and regulations. I remember going to many communities and all of a sudden seeing an infrastructure project being stopped. And I asked, why is that the case? And they said, well, the person who has his certificate of possession opted to, he didn't like to be blocked on a certain position of the house, so he moved it very closer to the road. And because it was too close, they couldn't continue with the infrastructure. So rather than making that person move the home, they said, well, it's his property, he can do what he wants, but they have no infrastructure. So if this authority having jurisdiction was being exercised properly, they would have actually not allowed that to happen in the first place. Again, with the building permits, it's reviewed by several departments, right? So it's reviewed by building, engineering, lands, fire, zoning, water, wastewater. They all make sure that it meets the qualifications. And also, they have different types of permits. So they have permits for new construction, they have permits for demolition, they have permits for renovations. And how do you make sure it's being enforced properly? Inspections. So inspections are the key ingredients to ensure in municipalities the authority having jurisdiction is being met. So what So that's just a big recap on authority having off-reserve municipalities. So what about the authority having jurisdiction in First Nations communities? Well, I think that's the big question. So how is the authority having jurisdiction provided for First Nations communities? Well, under the Indian Act, Section 81 gives the council bylaw making powers. So it gives the council the authority having jurisdiction to control zoning. It allows them to control building. It allows them to control land surveying. If you read other sections of the bylaws, they can control for noise, they can control for parking, they can control for nuisance. So it's a number of authorities that are giving under regulations under the Indian Act.
We'll make sure I'm on mute.
Chloe, can you unmute on those if you can? How is it also provided? Well, through modern treaties. It allows communities to give bylaw making powers and responsibility. I'm sure Rasika would talk about that a bit more. It's also provided in the comprehensive funding agreements. So in those funding agreements, it says that when you receive money from the federal government, it says that it must build to national or provincial codes and standards. It also states that council shall obtain all jurisdictional approval and comply with statutory requirements for capital projects. So even if you're getting money for a capital project, it makes it very clear what those standards are in those contracts. So land use of easements, drawings, you have to have project management. Because one of the questions that people raise is why, under a capital project, you have to do all these tenders and there's all these processes. Well, the funding agreements require all those, but under housing agreements, that's not necessarily the case. So authority having jurisdiction in First Nations. Well, as I just mentioned, the chief and council exercise authority having jurisdiction by passing bylaws. Their bylaws are passed by the council to help control certain activities within their communities, including, again, hypothetically, building permit processes to comply with their authority and allows them to enforce construction practices. Again, we're talking theoretically here because we're going into more detail. And if the federal government maintains that the First Nations are the authority having jurisdiction. So we've had a lot of questions raised earlier when we first talked about that. They say, well, it's really the federal government's responsibility for authority having jurisdiction because it's a treaty right, or it's their responsibilities. In fact, it's not. And it never has been. It's always been the responsibility of the chief and council to make sure that homes are being built in accordance with building codes. But what we're finding is that chief and council and their responsibilities under authority having jurisdiction are not widely understood or shared among many First Nations. So if you think of authority having jurisdiction off reserve and how it's applied on reserve, there are very few communities that exercise their authority having jurisdiction. And again, we're going into a little more detail. So what we found is that so here they have this authority, but chief and councils don't take on that power that's given to them. So very few, they don't pass ban bylaws to ensure homes are constructed according to building codes. At one time, we did a review of all the building codes or ban bylaws for building codes. And I believe we only found like about maybe a dozen communities that actually had up-to-date ban bylaws to exercise their authority having jurisdiction. A lot of them were dating building codes that don't even exist anymore. And a lot of them really lack some of the main ingredients, such as, can the inspector do a stop work order? So that being said, I only know of one community, possibly maybe 6 communities, that actually have the authority to allow their inspectors to do a stop work order. So because of all these issues, there's a real lack of a framework or lack of capacity. And what happens is, as we move now to build more homes and bigger infrastructures, the authority having jurisdiction becomes really more important, especially for infrastructure projects. And to make sure that, the land easements are being done properly, and to make sure that zoning laws are in place properly. Again, a lot of this was pushed through years ago through comprehensive plans, but again, some communities did them, some didn't do them. So it's really been neglected on how to exercise, especially on infrastructure and community plans. So what are some of the powers that they have? Well, zoning bylaws, right? So if a community passes zoning bylaws, we know they can do that in terms of land use. They can do it in terms of where, residential buildings can go. So for example, one of the debates we were working with one community, a community was issuing CPs. So this family had their CP, certificate of possession, and they built a home, a really beautiful home. And the person to the left of them got a CP, and he decided to open up a tobacco producing plant out of his garage, a manufacturing. And the land to the right of them decided to open up a recycling business, recycling batteries and battery components. So he went to chief and council and he said, how can you allow these commercial businesses to operate in a residential zone? And basically council said, well, it's their land, they can do what they want with it. And so that's how they dealt with it. But at the end of the day, it didn't really resolve anything, because, if there were zoning outlines or laws in place, that wouldn't allow to happen. Another big one is cottage sites. A lot of communities are in prime locations for cottages, so you can zone in terms of these are the cottages versus residential. And you can stipulate cottage is required, that a person can't live there any more than 6 months at a time. You can also protect certain areas. You can include campsites, and you can set fees for those campsites. And you can require building permits for buildings in specific zones. So if you have a zone that's commercial, then you can require permits for that area, and you can have, different types of demands. And again, they help in terms of community planning. So this is a community, I think it was Whitecap First Nations in Saskatchewan, that did a community plan and a zoning plan. And what's nice about this is you can see they have land use boundaries, and these are codes. They're very similar to off reserve in terms of terminology. So you can see the very top there is for agricultural, the red's commercial. So you can sort of see where they have their land development, residential, small lots. Under the R3, which you can see in terms of the light green, they had small homes, and then they actually had, they were building small 2-story units in R2 area. So you can see they've laid out their plans for the community, and they abide by these in terms of what they can do and not do. So you're not going to get a gas station right beside you or right beside a school. So they put those processes in place.
John, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between a bylaw and between having the land designated?
What do you mean by designated?
Well, there are some communities that actually have designations. If some area is going to be commercial, or some area is going to be designated for only residential, or some is going to be designated only for educational so that nobody else can, you know, in the middle of a residential spot, that somebody can't all of a sudden go in and put in a gas station, that it needs to be in a specific spot within the reserve.
So they would have made that designation under their zoning bylaws theoretically. So they would have already had some form of zoning bylaws in place, and they would probably have the same. So this is a pretty common urban planning jargon. So they would have a plan already as part of their zoning, and it could be from a previous community plan that they did that's supported by their zoning bylaws. Because you can't designate without a zoning bylaw, theoretically.
On, can I attempt to answer this question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So basically, because my experience has been in the local government, and it's mainly in BC, but it probably is similar in other parts of Canada as well. Local government, I mean other municipal governments versus now my work is all in the First Nation government. So I can give a little bit of a balanced perspective. So most jurisdictions have something that John alluded to, a land use plan and an official community plan. And sometimes, basically, some of the First Nation or Indigenous communities do not have an official community plan or a land use plan or a adopted plan that has certain designations, but it's wise to do that. So what the official community plan usually does is it designates all these major categories like urban residential, suburban residential, rural residential, and then there's commercial and industrial and institutional and all these bigger designations. But within residential, as per the designation, there are certain zones permitted. So supposing it's an urban residential designation within the land use plan or the official community plan, land use plan is usually a schedule to the official community, right? And so basically, if there is a certain urban residential designation, there are certain zones that are allowed within that designation. So that is how, and so, for example, suburban and rural designations will have zones that have bigger lots and need septic or need, a well that services it, versus urban will have smaller lots or denser zones that will allow them to basically connect to the existing municipal services. I hope that clarifies.
Okay. Are there any other questions at this point for?
Welcome back. Good, how are you?
Good.
Oh, I should email him about that one too. Sorry, I'm talking to myself right now. Since Michael Riz appeared.
Oh,
We lost him, John,
we
or
did. Okay.
or he's muted.
Okay. Mel. Oh, okay. Should
Go
I
ahead.
go on here?
Go ahead, John.
Okay.
Much clout does BCR hold?
All right. I'll continue.
Can you hear me? Okay, I'm gonna ask a question. How much clout does the BCR hold?
Well, it's as much cloud it's as much cloud as community wants it to hold. So a band council resolution, the problem with band council resolutions is, they're good today. The government election could change and they can be gone tomorrow. So they don't have the teeth as a band bylaws. So they're allowed to do BCRs. BCR helps to provide some form of direction, some form of governance, but you know, they're hard to enforce, right? Because who enforces BCR? So there's sort of an agreed statement on where they need to go, but are they, you know, I know in a lot of cases, you know, the teeth are given with the bylaw structure because they're harder to change.
So it is kind of federal issue, right?
Yes, and again, it depends how the community respects. Some communities really respect BCRs.
Yeah, okay.
So it really becomes that community's view on how BCR works. I know in some communities that I dealt with, BCRs carry, you know, good weight. People respect them. They understand what they mean, right? So others, you know, don't
Could,
really don't really listen to them. So yeah.
You could actually build a BCR on top of the BCR.
Well, that's what happens,
Yeah.
right? So and then you stop another BCR, so it's the bandage on the bandage, right? So but you know, BCRs are good, like Jim Monroe. I don't know if Jim's on here, but you know, he just showed me he's got a BCR that the community agrees that he's their inspector, that he carries out they don't really state the authority having jurisdiction, but he has the clout of the community to make the decisions and that they absolve him from any legal action through the BCR. So in fact, the community takes on his decisions, which is, I think is really wonderful. Although Jim has insurance, but the community has a confidence in Jim's capacity to carry out those inspections, which I think is a very interesting and it's very supportive for case in Jim's case. So, okay, so continue with building bylaws. So, and they can introduce building bylaws, and again, this is everything from property maintenance standards, you know, fire and safety. Because one of the challenges that we see is that, you know, building codes represent new builds and fire codes represent renovations. But in fact, you know, very few inspections happen on renovations, and renovations, as we know, the challenges are that they're not really inspected, but under bylaws, if you have the authority having jurisdiction, that's clear. There'd be no difference between a new home, a renovation, and there should be no differences between a council-built home, a members-built home, or somebody off reserve that is moving to a leased cottage and building a home on that cottage should have exactly the same standards. So those bylaws should clearly articulate that. So this slide, this is at the end. I want Rasika to address this one about how Tuasawan's moved. So that's, I'm going to turn that over to her at the end. I mentioned that people say, well, authority having jurisdiction doesn't really exist, but there are some communities that actually have done some fantastic authority having jurisdiction. So the Chippewa Rama, Miquelon in just north of Toronto, they have a land use and development bylaw. They have a building permit application for residents and non-residents. There's a filing fee. They have zoning areas. They have compliance with Ontario Building Code. They make it clear. And they also have another bylaw, which is say, you know, inoperative vehicles on the property are not permitted. And they will charge you a fee to remove those inoperative vehicles. So they're really quite diligent to make sure it doesn't get junked up by old vehicles all over. And they charge, you know, a process for their building permits. So there's a form of a cost recovery. The other strong method for authority having jurisdiction is land survey bylaws. And again, this allows for allotments for the communities. You have to do surveys, how many properties going for band members. Also, the land surveys are important because it's the registry for certificate of possessions or certificates of occupations, or if there's leased land. So a survey is imperative to make sure that that land is clearly identified and marked. So what are some of the challenges authority having jurisdiction in First Nations? Well, you know, a few communities have passed, as I mentioned, bylaws to state which building codes they follow. We get a lot of calls from contractors. So, and the call goes like this. We see a tender for community X and we have some questions. So I say, well, what's your question? I say, well, who's responsible for the building permit? And we say there's no building permits. Well, what code do they follow? Do they follow the national building code or do they follow the provincial building codes? And so then I say you have to get a copy of their bylaw. So it really gets complicated for anybody who wants to know what the authority have in jurisdiction, especially for contractors. And as we know, people who move from construction projects from off reserve on reserve, they're not, you know, the chances of them adhering to the same standards is questionable. And then we know many examples where the standards are not the same because they know, well, if there's no authority having jurisdiction, no, they're going to cut corners. They may not building to where you believe that standard should be. Another big issue, there's no building permits or permission systems. So there's no plans are signed off, there's no site inspections, there's no inspections for all components. And again, are you inspecting for the National Building Code or are you inspecting for the provincial building code? And what we also found, the big challenge, very few communities can allow stop work orders. So if the inspector goes to the home and says it's not making code, you can't stop the work. And generally what happens, then you get generally an argument with the council because why do you stop the work? We need the home, we need to pay these people. So it gets complicated. So authority, another big challenge are, we believe, are legal responsibilities. It's important that homes are built to national building codes. Homes must be safe for the occupant. Ensure that homes are meeting fire codes, especially in renovations. Like we know of a case, right, in out west where there's a fire. The fellow purchased a wood stove. He installed it himself. And what happened, he installed the wood stove on the wood pellet that it came on. So it was off the ground. Anyway, long story short, over the years, the wood pellet dried out, caught fire, the home burnt, there were deaths in that family. Was the heat source inspected? Absolutely not. It was not expected to make sure that was installed properly. Chief and council is also responsible for work site safety for new homes. It's their obligations to make sure that people are working on those homes are meeting occupational standards. And I know that gets into a big challenge because many of the communities don't really follow occupational health and safety, federal rules or provincial. And the big question is potential for council to be held legally accountable for injuries or deaths of community members in homes. So if a homes are not being built to code and there's a railing that they fall and trip and injure themselves, or there's a fire or death, or even mold issues, right? If homes aren't being built properly and there's mold, it's opening up for accountability to chiefs and councils. And how do we know this is happening? Well, let's look at municipal government's comparisons on authority having jurisdiction and legal challenges. And when we look at some of these cases, you know, one could argue that it will apply exactly to what's happening in municipalities. So the authority having jurisdiction in legal cases, we're talking about the liability. So there's several cases, and then we're looking at some of the reasonings and how they will apply to the reserves. So one of the big ones, City of Kamloops versus Nelson. So in this case, It was a house in Kamloops, British Columbia. They had an insufficient foundation, which was discovered upon inspection by the city. A stop work order was issued, but not enforced. The house was sold to the Nelson family. On discovering the construction deficiencies, the Nelson family sued the city for negligent performance of inspection. The court found that the city was 25% liable because it did not carry out properly their inspection functions. There are also cases where other municipalities have been liable for not doing similar situations. There's a case in Toronto. There's many cases that are very similar to the Kamloops versus Nelson. Another big important case that has impact or implications for First Nations is the case of Litter versus Mission District. And again, in this case, they were found liable for failure to issue a license and assure that a business was carried out in the zone which allowed for it to happen. So it became a zoning issue. So a type of zone, they didn't allow the permit to take place, and the person built it and they had to relocate it. And in fact, the plaintiff sued for relocation purposes, and that would cost the city $66,000. And again, we know that's the case possibly happening in First Nations, where you're allowing, a gas bar or a marijuana shop or some type of shop to not be built in that zone. And then you allow it to take place and you have to remove it. Then the council could be held liable. So, and another important case was Harnett versus Walla Construction. Again, this happened out in BC. And again, here the municipality was held liable for issuing building permits where it had information from soil tests that the land was inappropriate for construction and requirements of the building code could not be met. Again, that's very similar to a lot of the issues that we have in First Nations. Matter of fact, very few even do soil test. So in this case, the municipality was held liable and had to pay to rectify. Another important case, and this one here is Rothfield versus Menoloka. Here, the municipality was held liable as a result of the negligence of the city's building inspector in failing to detect design inadequacies after revealing building plans prior to construction. So again, there's a plan review taking place. They missed some inadequacies or some faults, and they allow it to happen. And they were held. This case, the city, the planner, were found negligent and had to pay. Again, impact on First Nations. Well, very few have plan reviews. So in this case, they had a plan review and they missed it. Is our homes and First Nations being sued because of authority having jurisdiction? Anecdotally, we hear that is the case. That especially homeowners, that community members that live on reserve and are moving back home decide to move back and they want to build a home. So they're issued a certificate of possession, or they're allowed their allocation, and they go ahead and build a home. And we know in one particular case, a home was built, and a couple of years later, the foundation started to give away and cracks. And a homeowner called the insurance company and said, I have this problem. The insurance company said, send us the plans, send us the inspection reports and all the approval processes so we can look at it. The homeowner said there was no such things. The insurance company says, not our issue. And that family turned and sued the chief and council. And I was told it costs around $60,000. They had to lift up the house, redo the foundation. So, because they are the authority having jurisdiction, and it was their responsibility to make sure that the home was built properly in the first place.
John, what happened to the outcome on that?
Chief and council had to pay.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And again, you know, we have fire deaths, we have people falling from decrepit stairs. And so there's a number of issues that it's important as part of exercising the authority having jurisdiction that you have to fix these homes. So, you know, worker safety again on site, it's a huge issue, and it's important that as part of the authority having jurisdiction, and we talked about that in our discussions on procurement, make sure that you ask that they have proper workers' compensation documents, because you're the authority having jurisdiction and you want to enforce that, because you don't want to be responsible for things like work safety. That should be clear, clearly stated in all your construction and renovation projects.
Okay, John, are we going to have a procurement webinar in the future?
We had it, and we'll probably repeat it. That's one of the discussions that we're having. So,
Okay.
So moving forward with authority having jurisdiction. Well, some thoughts are review your band bylaws, make sure they're up to date. You're not quoting a building code from 1975. You want to, you know, always ask, you know, how we're going to do the inspections, make sure that I'm advocating communities should seriously consider introducing a building permit or a permission system. And while council is the builder and the inspector, they need to follow a same process that anybody else who wants to build on reserve. That includes, you know, paying appropriate fees, having proper sign-offs, having proper inspections. And this is becoming more and more important as more people move back to communities. If your community involves cottage owners off reserve, it's important. Also very important in terms of small businesses and making sure that they're complying with all their requirements.
Can you recognize arm's length issues? With
Oh,
the
I didn't get-
council? Yeah,
I didn't
we
get
have
that.
the arm's length. You know. What does that really mean?
Oh, did you understand it? My speaker's not clear.
Okay, what does arm's length mean, really? When you deal with chief and council?
Well, chief and council are responsible, right?
Yeah.
Mel, do you have a comment there?
No, not at all.
Okay. So chief and council, they, you know, a lot of them don't understand that, you know, they, theoretically, again, they should have some type of process building permit systems that they're responsible. I'm just not sure if they really understand all the
Technical issues, right?
all them legal implications or the challenges, right? So,
Go ahead, John.
yeah. So, other issues for authority having jurisdiction, ensure homes have functioning, you know, fire safety devices, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide. Again, it's you're the authority having jurisdiction. It's important to have that done properly. Making sure homes are fixed and rails are safe. And we hear it time and time again, communities don't have the money. Well, you know, you need to collect rent, you need to collect some type of fee to offset those costs, because at the end of the day, you are the authority having jurisdiction, the chief and council, and they need to fix it. And they need to raise those revenues. And again, I don't want to get into discussion is housing the treaty right, but I will say we will have a webinar called Financing and Housing. And we would talk about how homes are financed and how fees need to be collected to offset those financing challenges. So that's all I'll say on that part. But many communities off reserve, they have a chargeback. They have a charge for services. Many of the building departments off reserve, they actually make enough money through their building permit systems to pay for their staff. They're more than cost recovery. And for communities should seriously look at, if people are building homes, they have the money to pay for these inspections, and they should be charged for those. So they shouldn't be coming out of ISK or the community's pockets at all. Finally, establishing authority having jurisdiction is good governance practices. And there's a recent case on fiduciary obligations of council to the members. And in this case, the courts held that the chief and council have a financial obligation to make sure that they're spending their money properly. And I believe that same fiduciary obligation will apply to them in the construction processes. So the chief and council, they're legally obligated to make sure those homes are being built properly. And how do you do that? You do that through building permit systems. You do that through procurement. You do that through inspections, accountability, right? Basically what it does, it improves decision-making powers for the communities, make sure that homes are being built properly. So I want to turn over some time over to, so I will unshare. Now, do we have any questions there, Claude?
We have some questions, John, but I think we're going to let Rasika go ahead here.
Yeah.
I'll kind of try and leave a few of those just after her presentation.
Okay.
Rasika, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me and can you see my slides?
You're good.
Okay. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'll try to zoom through in 10 minutes because that's what's left. I'll try my best. However, all the information that has been covered so far has been, very, very relevant and more relevant because we have this tremendous sort of diversity, I would call it, for lack of better word, between the various Indigenous communities. And I'm not just focusing on First Nation, I would say Indigenous communities. And I guess I'm talking specific to British Columbia, where we have more than 600 or so Indigenous communities. And the amazing fact is that only 25 as of 2019 have actually signed a treaty, and Tsawwassen First Nation is one such First Nation government that has negotiated a treaty and signed it. There are apparently 50 other communities in British Columbia that are in the process of negotiations. And absolutely, my name is Rasika Acharya. I'm a senior planner, background architecture, urban planning, urban design. And it's a pleasure to talk a little bit about, very high level on how Tsawwassen First Nation manages, their responsibilities in terms of governance, jurisdiction, safety for our communities, and many other things. So as you may be aware, Coast Salish people, Tsawwassen First Nation has been around for more than 5,000 years. Mostly people fished, hunted, canoed, gathered in the past, and there were prehistoric villages. And of course, they fell under the Reserve Land, the Indian Act. The location is amazing, absolutely gorgeous, right along the Fraser River and Boundary Bay. Colonial settlers claim, I'm going into a little bit of the history because it's important to understand how treaty has made a difference in our community. And so colonial settlers basically, came over, claimed the lands. There was a lot of settlers that came in. There was a ferry terminal that was built, the Tsawwassen ferry terminal that exists in 1958 that literally dissected the whole community into two parts. and actually sort of disturbed all the biodiversity and everything that was there. There was also the Roberts Bank coal port that was built. So everything in between, the tidal flows were blocked, ecosystem disturbed, and none of this was done with proper communication, consultation, engagement with TFN members. And so, there was the TFN members actually faced a lot of socioeconomic consequences that came through. And however, we had some visionaries who led the process, and there was some development that that was built in 1980s. Mr. Haken, this is a beautiful apartment building right facing the waters, and then there is Satsu shows. So all these developments were, sort of built in the 80s and 90s. They are placed under a 99-year lease because that actually prohibits any sales to non-members. Then there was all this, local economic globalization that also impacted because we are an urban indigenous community, First Nation community. So there's lots of opportunities that came by. And TFN actually joined the table in the treaty negotiations. And, by 2009 in April, in 2008, actually, there was a community vision, a strategic planning exercise, land use planning, all that was done prior to actually signing the treaty. And believe it or not, TFN members went through more than 14 years of negotiations, and finally, the treaty signing came about in April of 2009. But what's important here to realize is the development of all the regulations, including the TFN Land Act, the land use plan, the zoning bylaw, many other regulations that are in effect today were all developed prior to the treaty signing. So that's what's, and then we do have a 5-year strategic plan that is developed, goes through member consultation, elaborate consultation and feedback, and is adopted. So the current one is from 2018 to 2023. So we're almost at the end of that strategic plan. And basically it goes through a process, and all the budgets and the work plan is all aligned with the strategic plan. So like I said, April 3rd, 2009, TFN became a self-governing treaty First Nation. We got jurisdiction over 724 hectares of our traditional territory. In a minute, I'm going to show you the map of the traditional territory, which is, and then we also have a 25-year benefit with the Vancouver Port Authority because of the location right along the water. Treaty, if you may have read or known, it's a toolkit. It gives you the full authority to develop and manage the regime, the regulatory framework, the legal framework, the land base, the safety. Of course, it is higher liability because you are taking full responsibility of everything. It allows you to enact laws. Chawasan Land Act is kind of similar to other, the Local Government Act that a lot of municipal governments in BC are mandated by. The Chawasan Land Act actually is similar to that. We also have the Land Use Planning and Development Act, which manages and all development in zoning comes under that. We have the Community Governance Act, which is basically mirroring the planning and development portion of BC Local Government Act. And we also have a very streamlined body that actually enacts these laws. We have the legislature, and there's elections that happen once in 3 years. So this is the territorial map that's really showing, the whole territory along the Salish Sea and the Strait of Georgia, and all the red areas all under the traditional territory of TFN. The treaty basically, self-governing and ownership was signed, as I said. Huge vision there that, that SWASN members are united, proud, and confident in our culture and are connected in taking care of lands and resources and are healthy, well, self-reliant and prospering. So that's the vision that all the work is aligned with. So there are 12 elected members in the legislature. The chief and the top four make up the executive council, who meets once a week. They approve all the development and the day-to-day regulatory approvals. The TFN is the only First Nation participant on Metro Vancouver board, along with other 21 municipalities that are in BC. And TFN, as I alluded earlier, has a unique identity with taxation, land use, and many other powers. This is the legislature. We have, in fact, a spring legislature that's starting next week. And it'll go on all through February till the beginning of March. Most of the budget approvals and bill approvals all happen in the spring legislature. There's also a fall legislature. Supporting group committees or councils are advisory council, the judicial council, of course, the chief and executive council that manages the day-to-day operations, and the CAO who works closely. We have the strategic plan. So there are long-term goals, 5-year objectives, best practices, and of course, the respect for historical and cultural context. So this one is until 2023. This is the land use plan that was developed, adopted before the treaty was signed. And it's almost like an official community plan, which I alluded to earlier, which all municipal governments adopt. And OCP, the official community plan, is a bylaw that's adopted and is meant to be updated every 10 years or so. Of course, a community vote is needed in TFN to be, to incorporate any amendments to the land use plan. And this map is actually showing, this is an important difference to understand in the TFN context. This area that you see, the darker pale yellow, is called the TFN community area. And that's where all the member houses and facilities like the youth center, the elder center that's being designed and will be implemented this year. Any other facilities that are owned by TFN government, plus all the individual member housing and the affordable housing projects, which are the rental assets. All this is within this area, and the area, the light yellow area that you see outside is all leasehold lands. So in TFN context, we have long-term leases on residential, commercial, industrial, these types of uses, and those are still under TFN jurisdiction. And the developers go through. We have 4 developers who go through a proper process. If it's rezoning or a development permit or subdivision or a variance permit, a sign permit, building permit, all that. So they have to go through those approvals, and that's done through the lands department. So we have a very streamlined approach. And this is just a little bit of a background. So the context is before, at the treaty, all the former certificate of possession holdings were converted into something called TFSI, SWASN fee simple interest. And the holders of their land are able to develop subject to compliance with the land use plan and the Development Act, and of course the zoning regulations. And the TFSI hold partnerships. So there is like some joint ventures So those are also allowed under the TFSI tenure. So summary of the act. So basically it's one of the most important laws. It establishes a framework for administration. It prevents the sale of any of these TFSI owned lands because it's about protecting these for future generations of the members. It establishes a legal framework. It also, if required, if it needs to be amended, it needs a community vote. Just skip through. There's less time. There's a lot of information. There's a little bit on. So any development that happens in the leasehold lands has to pay off-site levies, and these are charges that actually fund some of the community amenities. So that's like the youth center, which was built, which was completed last year, is funded through the OSLs. There is a boardwalk. There are some other amenities that have been funded through this. And what's included in the offsite levy? So we do not have DCCs, development cost charges, and we do not have community amenity contributions, but we have offsite levies. And what can be funded through that? Infrastructure, transportation, sanitary, sewer upgrades, storm sewer upgrades, water line upgrades, neighborhood parks that are used by members, or some of our non-members who live in the leasehold area, some other amenities, and like the boardwalk or some specific amenities, and anything that's related to servicing and public works. What's not included, the local municipal roads, because that's the responsibility of the government, utilities, operations, maintenance, and upgrading of any existing population needs. So what's the process for development? Pre-consultation is encouraged. Applicants submit inquiry letter, site plan, including a subdivision layout if it's applicable. There's also a pre-application meeting that will basically decide whether there's a fee or waived. We have elaborate checklists for rezoning, development permit, subdivision, sign permit, and member consultation for zoning amendments is required. So it either goes to the advisory council or there's a community meeting. This is just a quick flow chart that shows you that this was the agreement. The agreement allowed this adoption of the Land Act, which is the main, and then the TFN Land Use Plan and Development Act as well. So there's also I forgot to mention with the Land Use Plan in 2009, in 2012 or 13, there were neighborhood plans that were developed. We have the zoning regulation, subdivision and development regulation, development permit regulation, building permit regulation, and sign regulation. And we have a very robust lands development department that has planners. I'm one of them. There's others who are engineers and building officials who are inspectors. And we also have enforcement staff who sort of regulate some non-compliance things that are around. There's also fees and levies, the OAS that I already mentioned about, and there's also the latecomer development cost recovery regulation. So it's pretty kind of similar to many other jurisdictions, but again, it's specific to TFN based on the TFN Land Act. And what all developments need to comply by is the BCBC code. So that's mandatory. It's safety first. There's enforcement challenges sometimes because it's members, and it can be just a stop work order or fines may sometimes not work. So sometimes the warning letters is one route that has sort of worked, and then there is meetings with the members because they need to understand it's about safety and it's not just about complying with the regulations. And sometimes, and we also have the Delta Police because we have an agreement with the Delta Police to assist with any community safety concerns that may occur from time to time. So this is a very high level. What I'm going to conclude with is some resources, and I'll try and post the link to this. There's a lot of information on our website in terms of all that I talked about, the Land Act and how the checklist and what's needed. And I think that will be a good resource for everybody to. I'll just post it in this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rasika. Very, very good presentation. And certainly there's a lot to learn from what we've heard today in the webinar. John, some closing thoughts?
Well, I know this is it's a challenge for many communities to get their figure out how to exercise, because we're all grappling with the same issue, right? Homes aren't being built to codes. There's contractors aren't meeting codes, and so there's this whole cycle of deterioration taking place, and one way to take control is authority having jurisdiction, because I believe it's forcing down the road chiefs and councils to do that. And I think that force will be through various legal actions, that it's just a matter of time before the floodgates open.
Yes,
Should we
certainly.
go through a couple of these questions here? There's
yeah,
go
if
ahead.
people don't mind, we certainly have a few questions. In fact, a good number actually. One is with regard to the new climate action energy efficiency. Certainly, maybe not quite on our topic today, but certainly indirectly, certainly climate action energy efficiency is certainly, it's an issue that needs to be addressed. Any comments out there?
I don't know of any communities. I know that we have a partnership. Too bad Candace isn't on. There's another group called Indigenous Energy. What's that? There's a
Indigenous Clean Energy.
yes. I believe they're trying to carry out that mandate. Who is that? Oh, there you go, Ian.
Yeah.
That's your
How are you?
bailiwick.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Do you want to address that question?
Yeah, and I think Leo, we've talked before in the past that you're in Bella Bella out there, Hiltzik. But yeah, I mean that's actually part of my question too. I mean, Rasika, you shared how you guys are going to the building, the BC building code, but I'm curious if you guys have seen any examples of people who have said yes, here's this case, but let's go beyond that. The only one that I've seen is out of New Hulk Nation, where they have their building spec booklet that lays out sort of guidelines on some of the climate and durability side of things to kind of push their housing a bit further than even with the base building code. But when you're in BC, you're already a step ahead than some of the other jurisdictions and provinces in Canada.
I could share something on that if it's okay.
Go ahead.
Certainly, go
Yeah,
ahead.
my name is Bill Semple. I work. I'm an architect consultant. I do work on housing projects in remote northern First Nations. Northern part of the provinces, NWT, Yukon, etc. I just say on that, this is interesting to hear this discussion, because one of the things I notice is that there is a tremendous interest in moving towards more energy efficient buildings, particularly with the idea of resilience. In the far north, the idea that you could walk away from your home for a few days and wouldn't freeze if the electricity went out is very compelling. But what this points out is the huge gap that exists between codes, between what people would like to see in the communities, and even more importantly, what's been highlighted here, the sort of jurisdictional things that need to get developed, and some of the implications for the lack of those. So I'm just saying, this is a big issue. This is a huge issue, and it's not resolved. And it's something that does need assistance in order to resolve, because there is a tremendous growing interest in this, notwithstanding, the government's desire to see net zero energy standards for homes across the country by, within a couple of decades, or if not sooner. So it's coming.
I know in our northern guide, we have some discussions about energy efficiency. Enercam was one of the major sponsors for us. So I know we've had that discussion as part of our guide to promote that, but that was only a very small component of our technical guide. But in terms of communities stepping forward, I hear you. And Claude, I almost think this is a webinar topic.
Yeah, certainly.
Yes, this is Leo. Sorry, this is Leo here that had posted a question from Prince George
Hi, Leo.
within the traditional territory of the Pike Leaks and A. That I posted that because we are working on something like this. So northern climates, research on cold climate heat pumps, just a whole variety of things that are out there, because the technology is changing so much, along with the codes that are required to reduce not only greenhouse gases, but also to protect our elders through all of these different heat waves and domes and fires and you name it. Okay? So it's there's a sense of urgency. So I don't think we can just continue doing the same old, same old. I think we should really focus on this particular topic, because that is the way of the future.
I agree. It's the way of the future, but I think that one of the important things to consider in this, and I was working with a community that have been working with a community that's developing sort of a net zero energy approach to doing housing. But the implications, you mentioned all the new technologies that are coming along. I think it's exciting and really needed. But there's also huge capacity building that's required, and then if that doesn't happen simultaneously, the worry is, particularly with things like home ownership and the potential for a lot of these technologies to go wrong. And one of the things you hear in the far north, if something goes wrong, is often the saying will be, well, it doesn't work in the north because so many things have failed. And once you hear that, then you're into a whole lot of other kind of implications. And so this is an important issue. I think some webinars or some discussion on this would be really, really useful.
I think that's where we were really originally planning for this session, actually, about the national energy codes, and certainly it all fits as part of the puzzle that needs to be all put together. My concern also is it really applying to all buildings and all housing in general, because a lot of it seems to be focused on new stuff, we'll call it.
If I may jump in, is that okay? Just 2 seconds.
Go ahead. Yep.
Okay. So I know this has been way beyond time, but yes, and the code basically just, comply with safety, and there's nothing about livability or sustainability or resilience or anything. So yes, I wanted to mention that TFN is currently developing a sustainability charter, because what has happened in the past is any sustainable or green building features that are needed are sort of negotiated on a case-by-case basis, and that's not a good approach. So we need a comprehensive approach, whether it's civic buildings that are owned by TFN, or whether it is individual homes owned by members or non-members, because we have a big proportion of leasehold lands, or if they're industrial buildings. I think energy saving, anything that combats global warming, climate change, it's just more than relevant. Should have happened like a few years ago, kind of a situation, and we're still grappling. But definitely this year we are embarking upon a sustainability charter, which will be our first step and a guide. And there will be some language of sustainably into our strategic plan, the next strategic plan. So I think there is a lot that's happening, and a lot of communities and people are aware of this because they're seeing the impacts and they're experiencing, and it's, until it is, they say until something knocks at your door, people don't take the action, but they're actually, feeling all those things. So I think it's becoming really, really serious, and a lot of jurisdictions, and certainly TFN is very, very conscious of this. And so I think, there's definitely no debate about whether there's a need. There's absolutely a need. Having webinars with respect to any of these topics would be a great idea, and in the new fiscal year. So I think, we'll just continue this dialogue, but there is action happening, and I think it needs to take place.
Thank you.
Excellent. Not to prolong this topic, but Ian, does your organization, or do you know, Julia's not on this, I think she was, do you guys have funds or structures to address the question that Leo raised for, how to set up action plans and stuff?
Yeah, so part of the work that we're doing here at Indigenous Clean Energy is actually starting to develop really rigorous energy efficiency and linking in health and durability all into that, because those are, realistically the primary concerns for most communities. We're starting to develop curriculum, and we have a growing resource library. I'll throw it into the chat here, of tools, and it even has like the spec booklet that I mentioned from New Hulk, so you can take a look at that there. But that's all the stuff that we're doing in the works, and we'll be rolling out that programming this year, specific on energy efficiency and opportunities related to that. So
great.
Yeah.
And if you want to send it to,
Can I jump in?
yeah, go ahead.
Can I jump in just briefly? We are just embarking on so it's a retrofit standards, guidelines and technique and all that. So, because a large portion of the units that we have within our reserve communities, there's ways to retrofit that. So I'm working with, BCIT and right here in Prince George, we have the Wood Innovation Design Center, passive housing, and there's a variety of different things we're kind of trying to melt together to do some retrofitting, the whole house retrofitting, not just little bits and pieces of it, because that's been a big problem in our communities. When you get a little bit of RAP, you get a little bit of maintenance money, you get a little bit of, you kind of start doing some of the work, but then for every action, there's a reaction. So we're working on that. So we're working on coming up with some really good drawings of what to do with wall structure.
Interesting you say that, Leo. We've been approached, I'm not sure if FNNBOA would do it, but to establish retrofit guidelines for accessibility for First Nations. Huge project.
Well, barrier-free, community barrier-free is pretty important, yes, for sure.
Yeah. Ian, if you want to send that information, if not in the chat, but we can send it out to everybody as well. And I know you guys got that fabulous information, so we can forward it to the numbers there.
Yeah, for sure. I'll send that along.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, Claude. Any other ones we want to address here? I think we had
maybe a few more, but certainly we are probably pressed for time. And one was to do from I think it was Greg, about drawings and engineering stamps. So why would an inspector be held liable? And again, maybe from my approach, the way I look at it, architects and engineers that stamp drawings are technically liable. And in many cases, I'm located in Ontario, it's the equivalent of being basically approved by the local building department. So a lot of that onus is being passed from the local building department, municipal building department, onto the backs of the architects and engineers. After all, they are the designers, they're the professionals that I think should have the knowledge of what meets code and what a good proper design is. So I mean, certainly that doesn't mean engineers and architects cannot be sued for, we'll call, mistakes that may be made. So again, Cody kind of followed up in response to Greg. In the the permit process, I believe that the plan review is a requirement to the issuance of the building permit. And again, for the most part, we know off reserve, that is primarily the case. On reserve, again, it's going to be up to what is the local requirement when it comes to First Nations. So it can vary quite a bit, as John indicated. So again, any thoughts there? Or is that pretty much covering it?
Lauren, FNNBOA is supposed to be non-political, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what we're talking about, we have political issues here that when it comes to BCRs and chief of council and all that, it's all political. And
Elvis, I think
what kind of direction are we heading into?
yeah, I think that gets back to John's slide with the elephant in the room.
Get this out of her. Okay, okay.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Elvis, and I think if we, I believe that if communities were exercising authority having jurisdiction, had clear and concise directives in terms of how they wanted to move the community. First of all, I don't think you would need BCRs for building, and secondly, it's there's the process is in place. So again, there are communities that have those processes. Like, so
Remember, you discussed that we'll deal with arm's length.
well, that gets a whole nother, because generally the authority having jurisdiction, the enforcement really becomes to the building official in that community. So in this case, so Jim did have a BCR, acknowledge him as their build official, give him the power, and the community supports him of whatever he does. But under a authority having jurisdiction, the building official has the power to determine how to move forward, and hopefully he would have the support by the council. Now,
It's a political issue, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the conversations we were going to have was, a bit further and have some municipal building officials online, because notwithstanding, municipal building officials have the act and they have band bylaws and they have these powers and they have these authorities. It's also pretty hard for municipal building officials to enforce. Like, they have to use suasion, they have to educate, they have to basically bend granite, right? And it's hard bending granite. And so it becomes a lot of discretion and working. So it's, and you take First Nations, and we don't have that compliance structure, and we're still in the same position. And that really became so clear when we had a meeting in Ottawa, which I hope to have again next year, is where we have municipal building officials meet with our First Nation group, and we talk about these issues in code. And everybody had the same concern in that room. It didn't matter if you were on or off reserve, if you had the power or not. So it becomes a very interesting discussion. And if we have time for next year, I would try to bring that discussion, to have municipal guys on this discussion, because it's a very good one.
John,
and I do see some municipal guys.
John, Charles, are you still there? Did you want to raise a point?
Yeah. I think the discussion about having that authority, although I believe that the chiefs of Ontario have given the authority to the inspectors, we still have no authority to enforce in the community.
Exactly.
And so then it lies with the chief and council, ultimately the chief, because they're the ones that have the authority. So, and we only advise and inform them on the deficiencies. And if the deficiency isn't isn't addressed through that enforcement, then there's nothing that we can do, right, other than say it was deficient. Right? They have to enforce that deficiency call in order for it to be repaired. And they might just there's nothing the contractor, like, they can just go ahead and do it and finish without even addressing the deficiency. But it will always be in the inspection report that states it was deficient, unless it's addressed through the chief and council, and they're the ones who give that, who have to enforce that that contradiction and say, no, you repair it or we're not going to pay you. That's the only thing they can do.
Yeah,
Right.
100% agree with you, Charles. We
Right.
have that discussion all the time.
So it's the same thing with the, it feels like with that professional engineer or that architect who stamps their drawings, we still have to go and ensure that the contractor who they hired to build that according to their stamped drawings has done it according to that stamped drawing. And if we notice something that's not and when it's being constructed, that's not followed that engineered drawing, they've altered the engineer's design, and they'll become liable for that change without any authority from the engineer or the architect. Right. So then we now have the responsibility to, I think, address to chief and council that they have done in their construction, they have contradicted the design. Now it's up to the chief to enforce the change.
That's
Right?
correct.
It's the first thing. So we are always, kind of, yeah, we can inform on code compliance, but we can't enforce anything. So the engineer becomes responsible for his design, and as long as they're signing off on the completed construction as per their design, there is nothing we can do to them if a contractor goes ahead and does without their knowledge, changes a design without their knowledge and their consent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, because then, so where the authority having jurisdiction would be, that community would have a banned bylaw in place saying, you need to follow, so for Ontario, the Ontario Building Code, and the building officer has the power to execute, compliance. So you don't have to go back to chief and council to say, well, you need to do this. You do it. You have the authority to issue a stop work order because you have their back. You already have the building permit. You have the power to do that. So it depoliticalizes the decision, because then the inspector can go back and say, boom, here's a stop work order. And based on a stop order, you receive no further payment. So you get to make that authority. It doesn't go back to the chief and council and let them wishy-wash on it, because they generally don't.
In this case, is it John? Who am I speaking to?
Yeah,
John. All the communities that I work in don't have that bylaw.
exactly.
They don't have the land code to be able to produce those bylaws, and they, like, you know what I mean? So the whole education process on authority, why do they need to know, right? And they're like, it's lying on the building official, where I'm not, that's part of the duty that I perform as an infrastructure specialist. But when I inform them that you need to understand your authority here, right?
Yeah.
Oh, no, you just do it. No, you need to understand. Okay, we will, and then it never takes place. So we're still being put in that predicament where we have to inform them or the housing manager, whoever the band rep is at that time, where our report goes, and then they're the ones that have to follow through, right? They're the ones that have to tell chief and council, no, we can't pay them this time because there's a contradiction to the code that they have to repair and have it re-inspected, right? So then they get caught up in, well, they don't want to argue with the contractor. Well, I'll come in and I'll talk to you, and I'm doing a lot of educating on site also, where these contractors or some of the contractors or some of the band help, they don't understand code, right? But they have to follow a design that, you know, that doesn't always get, you know, it doesn't always get reviewed prior to construction. You know, sometimes we don't even see a drawing; they just start building.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how are
No. Well, that's
so
right across. Yeah.
you know, so how are we moving towards a system like a municipal system, you know, that takes away the band's authority, or you know what I mean? Like they want ownership of their education, of their health. Now it's their housing. You know, shouldn't we be working on a system that actually helps them to develop a way that helps them to develop a community with healthy living standards that includes a building code that helps them to ensure their houses are being built to code, because we can do all the, you know, code enforcement we want, but when it comes to living in these homes, right, we have no say. And
Yeah.
then, you know, in 10 years it's deficient again.
Well, even 10 years, even before. So one of the challenges that we see happen is housing is really politicalized, and in many of the communities where it's politicalized, they're not moving towards they're not moving towards understanding how to exercise their housing. And I agree with you. We're moving to education. We're moving to health. We're moving to all these areas where they want the governance. They want the authority. They want the power. But housing seems to still be in that platform of skittishness. And I think as a result to, you know, they sit back and it's the politics of it. And you know, if I allow that to happen, can I really hire my you know, my relative to do it? What's going to happen? So a lot of them don't go down this path. But at the end of the day, you're right. You're getting homes that aren't making, you know, we argue 7, you said 10. So, but totally agree, Charles. And that's coast to coast to coast, your argument.
Yeah, John, I think one of the things I look at in your presentation, and both in Rasika's today, is the issue of the risks, the accountability, and certainly even the awareness and education about this whole topic on authorities having jurisdiction. I think there's certainly a lot of huge gaps that need to be completed. Certainly on the education and awareness side, I think the webinar that you presented today really helps really highlight some of those areas of concern. You know, certainly we know that housing can be a very touchy issue.
It is. And how you going to fill in the gap?
Well, I hope that's what we're trying to do is educating and awareness. And I think that's part of the purpose why we really like to put on these webinars. I mean, certainly, hopefully,
It's helpful.
yeah.
Put it this way, it's helpful.
Yeah, it's helpful. It's not going to change people's mindsets overnight, but again, I don't live on reserve. I certainly am aware of even situations where I can look at even my own friends that were building inspectors, indicating, you know, in some cases, municipal building inspectors, we get back to the arm's length issue of it's a friend of a friend who became the new building inspector. So again, it's accountability even and separation between the two. Like, how do you get that independence to get the honest opinion of it's not being influenced by somebody else?
And then that issue is still like a lot of First Nations communities don't want to deal with municipalities.
Yeah.
They want to self-government themselves and something that in that kind of category.
Yeah. But on a final note, I think the note by Charles is everybody probably agrees everything that Charles says. Like that could have been in any community anywhere, Charles. That was well articulated. So, you know, fantastic.
Yeah.
I just another note, Catherine mentioned interest in training, building officials. Actually, I just recently received more comments about training where I'm going to try to put something on the FNNBOA website. I would encourage anybody in Alberta, for example, to reach out to the Alberta Safety Codes Council. They actually have a scholarship for Indigenous people. So they've really have done a fantastic job reaching out, and we're partnered with a lot of the municipal building officials associations, so they provide a lot of our training now. But I will send a note out to everybody because recently I'm getting more inquiries, so I can address that. And on a final comment there, I just identified, another authority having jurisdiction, part 2, and one on this climate change and codes. So those are my final thoughts.
Well, thank you, John. I hope everyone's looking forward to our next series of webinars. We might expect those possibly
Yeah, we're hoping to get them out.
later spring.
Yeah, we have we have something like 65 topics in 30 weeks. So we'll have to sit down the next few days and put a priority on them. So we hope to get that list. But yeah, probably I'd hope to start maybe one out in early April, and we move forward. We receive some feedback. We'll probably continue with the same format, twice a week, one a week. The reason we're ending them at this time because I respect that everybody moving forward is busy with year-end issues and challenges. So, including ourselves, trying to meet deliverables. So on that note,
I have one. Well,
Go ahead.
one last one. Maybe Catherine, you want to have the last word here?
I just wanted, first of all, I'm grateful to have been able to participate in this session and listen to the discussion. Very valuable information, and I would just like to, I guess, put it out on the table. I would love to work together with you in an effort to collaborate to bring education and awareness, possibilities of training opportunities to the Indigenous communities, because I firmly believe in taking that ownership and pride. Because the one thing, there is a hidden client for building officials that is spoken in one course that we offer. And it is not who you think it is. It is not the applicant, it is not the builder, and it is not their jurisdiction. When a building official issues occupancy on a structure, it is for every person who enters or is near that structure for the life cycle of that structure. So the importance and value of that work is huge. And there are so many resources out there that I would love to network with you on and collaborate on. So please feel free to reach out to me. I appreciate Jim introducing me to some of this. Him and I have had lots of discussions, and I would like to further this with you all. I see the benefit of working together to create a better environment for all of us.
Okay, thank you for mentioning that word hidden. There's a lot of hiding within personal perspective, I guess. I think we shouldn't be hidden at all. We should all come out forward to this whatever problems we have with issues in Native communities. Let's come forward with this and let us work. And
Certainly, I agree, Elvis. I think a lot of it is sharing, and I think that's what again we try and do with these webinars, and certainly with the with the people that have stepped forward and offered comments in their support.
It's helpful, isn't it?
Catherine, we have a number of people, even including yourself, that have offered to, let's say, maybe change the mindset of the way we think and what we do and how we can improve things. Okay, John, over to you.
All right, thank you, everyone, and we will reach out. We'll send out an email to everybody when we have our list, and look forward to registrations. I know Ian will send some stuff, and we'll send the recordings. And if there's any other information, we're just sent out as a collective email for everybody on this topic. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey, guys.
Bye now.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rosika. That was very good.